Coming up on this episode of the Metal Command podcast, I talk about Black Sabbath and their last ever show. I review two albums, one by Primal Fear and Iron Savior, and I talk about the new song by one of my favorite German heavy metal bands, Rage. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Welcome back to the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited, of course, to be here with everybody today. And of course, if you do want to support this show, by all means, if you're on YouTube, give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, and hit that little bell to be notified about any content I do post. And also leave a comment. Let me know what you think about what I talk about. Any other social media, streaming service, whatever. Of course, give the show a like or a subscribe there. It greatly helps me out. Today's show, I'm going to review two albums. The first album I'll review will be Primal Fear's upcoming album called Domination, and then we have Iron Savior with Reforged Machine World. I'm going to talk about that during this show. Also, the new song by Rage, one of my favorite German heavy metal bands. I'm going to comment briefly on that. But let's get into the topic that many people have been emailing me and messaging me about. Black Sabbath, Back to the Beginning, the last show for Ozzy and Black Sabbath. For those of you that are living under a rock, obviously this is a very big thing that's been planned for some time. And this show also featured a lot of what people call rock royalty, a lot of legacy artists, basically, like Metallica and Slayer and Anthrax, and just tons of musicians showing up to this, to play a short set in a big festival setting. And then, of course, at the end of the show, you had Ozzy doing a set of his songs from his solo career. And the very last set was Ozzy and, obviously the original Black Sabbath lineup of Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Bill Ward, and Geezer Butler. So I've been asked about my thoughts on this show. So here's what I'm going to tell you. First of all, I did watch it, but the only part of the show that I watched was the Ozzy Osbourne set and the Black Sabbath set. To be honest, I really didn't have any interest in watching the other artists that were playing on that show. I really it didn't hold any interest for me. They're legacy bands. I've seen them a million times. It's cool they went out there to pay respect and pay the respect of, to Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne, because, look, these bands wouldn't exist if Black Sabbath didn't exist. So, so again, before I get into this, I did not watch any of their sets. I saw some clips, some reels, but I really didn't pay that much attention to them. And I just, for whatever reason, I just didn't really have any interest in them. But I'm curious, folks, before I go into this, in the comments, let me know what your favorite Ozzy Osbourne solo album is, and let me know what your favorite Ozzy Osbourne era Black Sabbath album is. And in fact, if you want to give me your favorite Black Sabbath album, even if it isn't in the Ozzy era, I'd be interested in that as well. So let's get into this. Black Sabbath, for me, their legacy is just, it's even hard to put into words sometimes, but if there is a band that probably had the biggest influence in the heavy metal scene, it is Black Sabbath. I mean, hands down. This music would not be what it is, or it may not even have even existed if Black Sabbath did not exist. So many bands and so many musicians, even up until now, have been highly influenced by this band. On top of that, there are people playing other genres of music who have been highly influenced by Black Sabbath. I mean, they're just a legendary group of musicians. Tony Iommi, for example, has had an influence on countless guitar players and musicians in the heavy metal scene and even outside of it. Ozzy Osbourne, while some people may not, say Ozzy's the most influential as a singer, the people he brought into his solo band were extremely influential on so many musicians out there. I mean, look at Randy Rhoads, for example. Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne, to his credit, has always, in his whole camp, has always made sure he's played with top-notch musicians and just extremely talented people. And a lot of those people influenced so many people out there. Randy Rhoads. I mean, how many people, pay homage to him? He had a huge influence on so many guitar players. Jake E. Lee, Zakk Wylde. He's even had guys like Jerry Cantrell and Gus G in the band. He's just had so many talented musicians. And Ozzy's music has been beloved by so many people over the years. And those albums have had a huge influence on the scene. They just have. So there's just a lot to be said there. And let's get into Tony Iommi. I'm going to point him out specifically because, yeah, you had the Ozzy era of Black Sabbath, but at the same time, Tony Iommi kept Black Sabbath going after the Ozzy Osbourne era. And Tony always brought in phenomenal musicians. I mean, just look at the singers he brought in. You had guys like Ronnie James Dio, Ian Gillan, Glenn Hughes, Tony Martin, who I consider an incredibly underrated vocalist. He had drummers like Cozy Powell in the band. I mean, he's always had a fantastic group of talented players surrounding him in whatever era of Black Sabbath was happening at the time. Guys like Ray Gillan sang for him briefly. So Ozzy and, his solo career, having the huge influence that it did, and of course Black Sabbath, especially that early 70s stuff and, even the first couple Dio albums. I mean, just an incredibly influential band on so many people on so many levels. So as far as the show goes, I got to give Ozzy some props for going out there and doing what he did. To have the medical issues and the physical issues that he has had over the last 7 or 8 years, and to go out there and put himself out there and sing these songs, I'll be honest, I got to give him credit for going out there and doing that, because when you are dealing with the things that he's dealing with, it's not easy. And I got to be honest too, I thought he actually sounded really, really good. Obviously he's had years for his voice to rest up, but again, this guy is dealing with a lot of medical issues. And were his vocals perfect? No. I mean, there were a couple spots he missed a note, but for the most part, I would say Ozzy sounded pretty damn good. I mean, obviously the people playing the songs, the musicians, they sounded great. Bill Ward, I believe he's fought some health issues. For him to come out and play these songs again, one last time, again, I give these guys credit for doing this. I thought it was a really nice send-off for the guys in Sabbath and for Ozzy. I thought it was nice that you did have a lot of legacy artists come out and pay tribute to them. And, again, none of those artists. I did see a clip where James Hetfield talked about that Metallica wouldn't exist if it weren't for Black Sabbath. And he's completely correct in that. None of those bands would exist the way that they do if it, would exist, or maybe not even exist at all, if Black Sabbath never existed. So I've really, for the most part, I've enjoyed the discographies of both Ozzy's solo career, which, again, give credit where credit is due. You guys might all hate Sharon Osbourne all you want, but you have to be a genius when it comes to marketing and picking out talent to make a band like that successful. Now, she's obviously not the only one doing that. There are a whole bunch of people, on that team, in that camp, that have done that over the years. But again, give credit where credit is due, because Ozzy's solo career exploded when he left Black Sabbath, when he was out of the band. And then we go to Black Sabbath in general, just all the different eras. Just, I probably would say, aside from maybe the Seventh Star album, which was okay, pretty much everything Iommi did and the lineups he brought in were all pretty good. So give props where props are due. And I think Tony, I think the guys in Sabbath, obviously the guys that played the solo songs for the Ozzy solo stuff, all those guys can still play well. I mean, all of them. And it was nice to see this send-off happen the way that it happened. And folks, this is also a wake-up call. Because Black Sabbath is gone. And this goes to any of you out there in the metal scene who have, money and put a lot of these shows together. Just keep in mind, these legacy artists are not going to be around forever. And at some point, because look at the people on the bill. Metallica ain't getting any younger, folks. Anthrax, these guys aren't getting any younger. Slayer really doesn't play a lot of shows, but again, Kerry King, these guys, they're not getting any younger. I think it should be a wake up to a lot of these promoters to start in record labels to really start investing big time into some of these bands to elevate them to that status and change the way that they promote their bands. Because once these legacy artists are gone, they're gone forever. And if you haven't seen them live, you may want to go buy a ticket if you've never seen them before. Because once they're gone, and they ain't coming back. So on that note, so people will ask me, what is my favorite Black Sabbath album? So since it was the send-off for the original lineup, I'll stick to the Ozzy era. It's very difficult to pick. I'm also somebody that likes the Technical Ecstasy album, and I like the Never Say Die album. I know some people don't. But those two records I think are pretty solid. My favorite Ozzy era Black Sabbath album, it's really tough. It would either be Sabotage or Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. It's one of those two albums. It's hard to pick. It depends on the day. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, I think, is an incredible album. You have the title track. You have Sabracadabra. You have a great group of songs on that. Sabotage has, probably my favorite Black Sabbath song in Symptom of the Universe. You have Hole in the Sky. You have The Writ. You have some really incredible music on both of those records. So I got to be honest, it's hard for me to pick between those two, but those are my favorite two Ozzy era albums. People always ask me, what are your favorite non-Ozzy era albums? Like, what's your favorite album? I'll be honest with you, probably the two Dio albums, the first two, and then probably Headless Cross would be right in there as well for going the non-Ozzy era. But generally speaking, the Ozzy era had such a profound impact and influence on the way that the heavy metal scene pretty much evolved. And a lot of these early bands were really highly influenced by them. And even bands that are coming out now, you still hear the love for Tony Iommi, Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, and of course Ozzy solo stuff as well. Favorite Ozzy Osbourne solo album is very, very difficult. I think he's one of those few artists that when he had a solo career, it was just as good, if not probably a little bit more accomplished sales-wise. And I haven't looked at the numbers than maybe the Sabbath era was. But No More Tears was an album that came out when I was in the early 90s. That album was huge for me. The first two albums with Randy Rhoads playing on them were big. Pretty much everything from the first album through No More Tears was incredibly awesome for me. But if I had to pick one, No More Tears is probably my favorite. But my favorite guitarist was Randy Rhoads, just the stuff that he played on those first two records. And all these classic songs, especially from the Blizzard of Oz album. I mean, they're still extremely relevant today. You still hear them played, like, you watch a baseball game and you hear Crazy Train come over the PA. I mean, these songs are still being played everywhere, and that is the staying power that they've had. So, but it's tough. I'd have to say, only because of when it came out, No More Tears, that was an album I listened to over and over again. So that's my take on the Black Sabbath, back to the beginning show. I think it was very well done. I think it was a great send off. One of the weird things, I'll tell you one odd thing at the very end that kind of struck me as weird is at the very end of the Black Sabbath set, the band all kind of just walked off, and Ozzy kind of looked a little like, where you guys going type of thing. That was a little strange. But aside from that, I'd have to say Ozzy sounded pretty damn good for a guy with a lot of physical and medical issues. I liked the chair or the throne they brought him out in. I thought that was kind of cool. But give credit where credit is due. It was a very well promoted show. They had a streaming version of it you can buy and watch if you weren't obviously able to go. You had a lot of great artists. If you're into a lot of those legacy bands, you could catch a short set with those bands and musicians if you wanted to. For me, it didn't hold any interest, even though I like a lot of those bands. It just, when you've seen them live a million times back in the day, I just don't get that interested in them anymore. It's just how it is. But generally speaking, I thought it was a great send-off. Now let's get into my next part of the first half of this show. Primal Fear has a brand new album coming out in September 2025, September 5th on Reigning Phoenix Music. I have a lot to say about this. For those of you that follow the show or don't follow the show, just want to remind you there is an interview I just did with Ralph Sheepers. And I'll get into Ralph in the interview in a little bit. And I just want to briefly touch on Primal Fear before I get into the album. Folks, this show started in the late 90s. One of the bands that has been with me and the show, and I basically grew up with, as far as their music is concerned, is Primal Fear. Their first album came out right around the time I was starting my radio show, which is what the Metal Command originally was. And Ralph was one of the first people in that, he was one of the people in that first year that came on my show. And over the years, I've interviewed various people from the band, either him or Matt, but Ralph has come on the show multiple times. But Primal Fear's music has been with me for all this time. And you know what else about Primal Fear has always been with me? It's the fact that they've never disappointed me as a music fan. And I can honestly say that. I have never heard an album by them that was bad. Every single record they have put out, you have great songs. The albums always sound great. There's a lot of catchiness, and the musicianship is amazing. Ralph has also never really lost anything in his voice. I'm going to talk about that later in the segment. But they've always been an incredible band despite the lineup changes. And, I had full confidence they were still going to make an incredible album, even after they had this little lineup shakedown that happened, with a bunch of people leaving the band at the same time. If you want to know more about that, I'm not going to really talk about it here. But it definitely is in the interview with Ralph Sheepers, which will be in the show notes. So this is a band I've grown up with. I first heard of Ralph Sheepers, singing with Gamma Ray. My first time ever hearing him sing. The first album I bought that he sang on was Sigh No More by Gamma Ray. The first album I heard him sing on, I didn't know it was him singing the backing vocals, but it was actually the Scanner album Hypertrace. I didn't know he sang on it until I looked in the credits and saw that Ralph Sheepers did some backing vocals. And I think there's an interview with Axel from Scanner where we talked about that. Anyhow, the bottom line is this is a band that has been incredibly consistent. And they've always put out a great record every single time. Now, before I get into the album, let me talk about Ralph for a minute. The interview was very good. Actually, every interview I've ever done with Ralph has been great. But the one thing about Ralph, compared to a lot of other people that I've interviewed, and Ralph is always, like, when you talk to him, you feel better. Like if you're in a bad mood and you just sat and, BS'd with Ralph for a little while, you would just feel better. He has that kind of aura about him where it's just, you come back in a much happier mood hanging out with him, and talking to him. He just has that kind of mood. And I think if you ever follow him on social media, he does talk a lot about positivity. And he's just a very good soul, as a person. And you could tell that when you talk to him and you get to know him. And that's one of the things that took away from it. And then if you listen to the interview, he said something to me that I was not expecting him to say. And it was something he said about me personally, and that he thought that I am a very well-grounded person, and that I, and this is something a few of you have written me. I know a few of you that have watched the interview have sent me messages about. I'm a well-grounded grounded person, and I really have a good. I mean, the best way to probably put it, I really have a good viewpoint on things. Now, and a really good understanding of how things work in bands and music and stuff like that. So I think, number one, for people that want to know that, why that is, I've been a publicist before. I'm friends with a few bands. There are bands that, I've known, like bands like Halloween and Jag Panzer, and in some of these bands, I've known a lot of these bands for years, and I've been friends with them, and I've even worked for some of them. Not Jag Panzer, but I have worked for some of these people. So I think that, and the fact I've been a musician, I've just done the only thing I haven't done is I haven't been like a promoter or a tour manager or a booking agent or anything like that. But the other stuff I have, and I think that's what gives me a very good understanding when you have like crazy lineup changes, for example, and you saw me comment on the Primal Fear lineup change. So that was something I wasn't expecting him to say. It's kind of like, if you look at the interview with Nefarious, Rick Hunolt, the former Exodus guitar player that was in Exodus at one point, said he didn't see I was scripted. Nobody's ever really noticed that before, because I'm really not scripted at all. So, but those are compliments that I was kind of shocked he said it to me, to be honest, but I did appreciate that a lot. But I've always had a lot of respect for Ralph in so many ways. And his performance has always been strong in anything he's ever done, even going all the way back to when he was singing with the band Tyrant Pace. Just an incredible singer, incredible dude. The interview's down there. And I'll play a couple clips here in this segment. So let's get into the album. Domination. The previous album was Code Red. Very good record, by the way. But we have this new album, Domination, which comes out in September. So the biggest thing is, people will always ask, what is the biggest difference between this new album, Domination, and the previous one, Code Red? And I would say the biggest difference is that Domination, it doesn't have as much aggressiveness as, say, Code Red did. But the choruses and the songs, I think, are a lot catchier. If you look at the two singles, Far Away and The Hunter, they have very, very catchy choruses. And we talked about a lot of these songs. In fact, I would say almost every song on this album would make for a great single to represent the album. And that is actually something we talked about in our interview. Ralph and I talked about. Check out this clip. This is from the interview we just did. Here you go. One of the, I haven't said this yet, but one of the best aspects of this record, and the reason that I said the singles that you put out are a really good indicator of what the album sounds like. Listening to the record, I've only had the record a couple days, but any of these songs really would have made a good single. And I cannot say that about a lot of records that get sent to me. Was it difficult to pick those songs, and why did you pick these two tracks,
Yes,
The
I can
Hunter
say.
and Far Away?
Yeah, I can say it was not easy to pick singles, like you said.
Hmm.
First of all, we had also another title. So the first idea for title would be Destroyer, for instance. But then we
Yeah,
thought, no, let's be a little bit more positive. So we just said, let's do another name, which is not a song on the album. And it's dominating. It's like the eagle is dominating the sky and everything, you know. Coming back to your question about the singles, yeah, I mean, it was really hard, but in the end, we want to show that we are Primal Fear with the first release, Far Away. I mean, this is typical.
yeah,
You have the twin guitars, the twin solos, you have the fast rhythm, and you have the melodic vocals. That's what we did in the year of 2000, for instance, with Nuclear Fire.
yeah,
And in our opinion, that was a good way to open first door for this album and release it to the world, you know.
yeah.
And then we thought about this Hunter thing is a little bit more melodic to Far Away compared to Far Away. We thought it's also a strong statement to go out there and show that we still have the riffy guitars as well. And as you heard the album, there's so much more on it, and it's
Yeah.
always tough if people judge the first songs. Oh, this is not going to be, if you don't hit their nerve or whatever you want to call it. We hit a lot of good nerves to say that there's so many good comments about it. But you know, there's always people out there who are not happy with something. But I would really suggest to listen to the whole album and then make your opinion about it, which is absolutely fine with us if you have your opinion, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think that, there's albums I'm listening to right now. I just commented on a few of them, that, sometimes the singles, sometimes bands miss on it. I think they miss a little bit more than they hit on the singles, but I think you picked the right ones. I mean, like The Hunter, for example, I mean, that's the first song in the album. I think that, it's got a great chorus. There's a song on the record, that had a chorus part that really caught me. And it's a song called I Am the Primal Fear. And that song is actually probably one of my favorite songs you guys have ever done.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. And, there's a lot. I always tell everybody, you got to give the album a chance, because sometimes singles may not, you have to put out the singles the way that things are done now. I mean, you're putting out 3 to 4 songs typically leading up to the release date. And I think you guys picked 2 pretty solid tracks for that, though. I think most of the reception was pretty positive that I saw. There weren't a lot of crazy
Sure.
comments, but
I mean, you always have these hardcore, fast, speedy heavy metal guys who, oh, this is,
yeah,
itchy people are everywhere. Let's say it's 5%. So we're still
yeah,
good with 95. And
no,
like you say, I Am the Primal Fear. We keep this jewels somehow for the release September 5th. There has to be something left, right? So
it's Ralph Sheepers with us talking about the various songs on the album. So there are a lot of tracks that I really love in this album, and when I record this in this review, you can always reference back to it if you want once the album comes out. I know there's only a couple singles out now, but both of those singles, The Hunter and Far Away, are absolutely fantastic, and I think they did a great job picking what songs would go on the album, because honestly, most of these songs you could put as a single and people would like them. There's a song called I Am the Primal Fear. The Dead Don't Die is a track, and that's a track I forgot to mention to Ralph, I think. But I love that track. I love the chorus in it. But these songs are really cool in the fact that they're some of the catchiest tracks that the band has ever written. The songs are still heavy. The performance of everybody is still awesome. Ralph still sounds amazing on them. But if I'm gonna kind of differentiate it from Code Red, I think Code Red had a little more aggressiveness to it, where Domination has a little less, but the choruses and the songs themselves are a little bit catchier, I think, than the previous one. What would I give it as a rating? Well, I gave Code Red a 10 out of 10 when it came out. This one gets a 10 out of 10. Obviously, I like it for different reasons, but again, Primal Fear delivers the goods. Not trying to delivering the goods. I'm not trying to use Judas Priest reference, but Primal Fear is delivering the goods on this again. They've put out an incredible album as always. Everyone sounds great on it. Definitely 10 out of 10. I'll put a pre-order link for the album in the show notes. But that's what I think of the album. Lastly, and this is the last part of this segment, I want to talk about something Ralph and I talked about in the interview. I asked him about, because if you go and look at Ralph Sheepers online, the guy literally looks like he's ripped. Like you could put him in a bodybuilding contest. The guy's always hitting the gym. And I think and you know what? There is a direct correlation between keeping your body healthy, between keeping your body in shape, and your voice sounding amazing. And I brought that topic up to him. And if and you always see people like him. Tim Ripper Owens is another one. If you look at Tim Ripper Owens, he hasn't really lost anything on his voice. You always see Tim with gym selfies quite a bit when he's back home because he keeps his body in shape. He stays healthy. And I firmly believe from experience as well that it is very, very important to keep your body in shape and healthy. And Ralph and I talked about that. This is from our interview that we just did. Check out this clip. You talked about doing this for 45 years. Obviously you were in Gamma Ray before this. You had Tyrant Pace. You sang on some various projects. I know you did like a lot of the backing vocals on the first Scanner album. I mean, you did this for a very long time. And one of the things that I see you talk about periodically on social media, you really preach a lot of positivity, which is great. But one of the things you talk about is every now and then you bring up, hey, you go to the gym, you work out, and health is a very important thing for you. And I've always said, I see like you and I see Tim Ripper Owens going to the gym, sharing photos. And I have to think that, as a singer myself, that, doing what you're doing is really why you're still able to perform the way that you are. Because I listened to this record. I mean, you could still hit pretty much all the notes that you did before. I listened to Tim sing. He's still just as good as he was 25 years ago. Does that have a big, when you hit the gym, I've always, one of the things they say too is that it's one of the more, it puts you in a great mood. If you're down and bummed out or you're depressed about something, you go in there and you feel better coming out of it. How much has that contributed to your longevity in doing this?
To be very honest, Tony, I don't think it's not linked if you are working out to the singing. I mean, you listen to Freddie Mercury, for instance, or also many other things, Ronnie James Dio and so forth. They were, in my opinion, never worked out really. But what it does is a certain way of discipline, It's what kind of discipline and how much work you put into something you can really compare, right? So, I mean, Tim, buddy, he's also working out. We talked about it, and what a nice guy he is anyway. So, and I'm really glad that he's doing this. I like to watch his stories where he's still at it and so forth. I like that. And yeah, it takes a lot of discipline to keep going because there's so many people start and then, oh my God, it's hard work. Yeah, of course it's hard work, and it's hard work to be a singer as well. On tour, for instance, and this is that's what I always compare a little bit. The more work you put into, the more the result will be positive in the end, right?
Yeah. Well, you guys aren't exactly singing music that's easy on the body either. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, to do what you do on tour, and to sing the way that you guys sing, or a lot of heavy metal singers in general. I mean, it's not easy on the body. I mean, it's pretty, I always used to say that the touring is the hardest on the drummer and the singer. That's pretty much where it goes. But, you've done this at such a high level for a very, very long time. And, I have to believe that you keeping your body, in shape and where it should be, it contributes to that.
It's about health. I mean, I had my phase when I was in the 90s where I had my rock and roll era as well. So I never say never to that I didn't do anything, but
Yeah.
you find out on your own if this is good for you or not. And in the long term, of course, it's not. So, and you've got your certain responsibility towards your children, you have your family, and of course towards your body. And
Yeah.
I want to live as long as I can because I love life.
Hmm.
I love
Sure.
to be love to be on that stage, and you can only do it if you're healthy, which is not intentionally always. Well, I have to be healthy. It's just it's a way of it's a standard of life. It's just given, you
Sure.
know.
So if you listen to that segment, he talks about how being in shape is linked to his voice sounding great. I can attest to that from experience because I did not sing for a long time and I really wasn't in the best of shape when I sang on the Empires of Eden album, which, by the way, speaking of that, the previous Empires of Eden album, I think it was Architect of Hope, that's the name of the album. Ralph sang on that album and I sang on the track after him. But anyhow, I had to sing again. I had to really get my body in shape to be able to perform because I can tell you that I wasn't in the best of shape and I had to get into shape to be able to sing again. Now, I've stayed on that workout routine since then because it was kind of depressing to not be able to hit any notes that I used to hit when, because I wasn't in the best shape as far as my body is concerned. But that is very important because if you look at people whose voices they've lost a lot of times they're not in the best shape physically. But Ralph and I, as you heard in that segment, we did talk about that. So anyhow, the album gets a 10 out of 10. And again, this is a band I will always speak highly of. Primal Fear, just like Iron Savior, who I'm going to talk about later in the show. These are bands this is a band that started when my radio show started. And I've just grown up with them as a young adult. Now I'm 47 right now. I think I was 19 or 20 when I ended up getting the first Primal Fear album, the self-titled. And it's a band that's probably, I can pretty much say, is always going to be with me as far as their music is concerned. There's always going to be a time where I'm going to want to listen to them. And I just have nothing but great things to say. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast, everybody. After the break here, and let's get into the upcoming Iron Savior album called Reforged Machine World. And that comes out August 22nd, 2025. It comes out on Perception label. Perception is a sub-label of Reigning Phoenix Music. And really excited for this. So I'm going to go over the album. I'm going to reference the interview I just did with Pete Seelig, which is up on the podcast everywhere. And I'm going to recap a little bit as to why they decided to do 3 albums worth of re-recorded stuff from their first few albums. So let's get into Iron Savior a little bit. I just talked about this with Primal Fear. I'm going to get into this with Iron Savior. This is a band that came out right around the time my radio show, the Metal Command show, was starting. Another band that I not only grew up with as a young adult, started getting into when their debut album came out, but this is another band, just like I was talking about Ralph Sheepers and Primal Fear, another band that has been part of this show since their first album and since the beginning of this show. And I grew up listening to a lot of these songs that were re-recorded. So with a lot of these bands, there's a special meaning for me when I go back and listen to these early albums, because there's a lot of great memories that I had in discovering those bands and into, getting into their music and following them throughout the various album cycles over the years. So when it comes to Iron Savior, I remember when I bought their debut album, I actually bought it at a record show. Back in the day, if you wanted imported music, because at the time, Noise Records really didn't have a lot of U.S. distribution. They eventually had something called FAD Records that put the album out in the States about a year after it came out. But if you wanted to get any of these heavy metal releases, you had to go to places that stocked imports. And there was this record show, like a buy, sell, trade records, rare CDs, things like that. And I ended up getting the first Iron Savior album there. I just happened to see it in there. It was like $10. And I remember getting into my car at the time and hearing the song Atlantis Falling and the opening riffs of the song and the chorus. Everything about that track, I immediately knew I was going to love this band. Now, I saw that Kai Hansen was part of the band at the time. They had Toman from the former drummer from Blind Guardian in the band. I just knew from the get-go I would love their music, and I've liked their music ever since. And then, it's not even a year later, I start the show. Unification comes out eventually, and then Pete comes on my show, and Pete, of course, was hanging out in San Francisco at his mom's house because his mom lived in, came to the States and, lived here for, about 30 years. And I did an interview with him. And he told me the whole story of the Iron Savior concept. It was a ship that people discovered that had been lying kind of dormant on Earth for many, many years. And it was just a fascinating thing to talk to people like him in the very beginning, because that was also the time we had like this resurgence of power metal. Gamma Ray was doing a lot of their stuff, Running Wild, Gravedigger, all these bands from Europe, Hammerfall. They were all like bringing the power metal thing was starting to make a comeback. So that is how I discovered Iron Savior, and that is how I ended up getting into their music. And Pete, for most album cycles, has come on my show over the years. Very good dude. I've always loved talking to him. Incredibly nice guy, and really in my opinion, a very talented musician and guitarist. And actually, I think his vocals have gotten a lot better as well, over the years. But his vocal style is very unique, and I think that's part of why I like the band's music so much, because the blend of that music and his vocal style, I think, just makes for a pretty unique sound within like the power metal subgenre, essentially. So we have an interview up there. We explain, we talk about the record, we talk about the album Firestar. And again, Pete's been through a lot of stuff. I mean, he just got through cancer. Had to battle through a lot of really bad health problems. And to come back and put something out like this, I think is awesome. Now, before I get into this record, let me also briefly recap why they decided to do these re-recordings, which is well documented on the show. But in case you don't know, the early part of this band's catalog, Pete doesn't know who has the rights to it. There's no one he can contact or doesn't know who to talk to get the rights to those albums to reissue them again. So the only thing you can really do then is, if you want to keep those songs out there, is to re-record them all. And then, and this is kind of a minor part of it, when you get to albums like Dark Assault, I 100% agree with him on this. The production and the mix on that album wasn't the greatest. So now re-recording songs from it, you can bring new life to those songs. And that's exactly what they did. That album, Dark Assault, the new versions of those songs, I just sound incredibly so much better. And then, of course, my biggest complaint at the time, the first couple Reforged albums had nothing from the Interlude EP. But we did have a couple singles, Eye of the World, and you had another single on the album. I'm going to play you the clip where Pete talks about picking those songs and, of course, talking about the new record label, Perception. Check out this clip right here. So you had a label change. Obviously, AFM, went through, kind of a buyout, as we want to say, and pretty much all of those bands have left, and now you're with a label called Perception, which is new. It's part of Raining Phoenix Music. Maybe talk a bit about the move going to the new record label.
Well, I mean, for me, I could have looked for a different new label. I mean, why I was landed with a perception label or Raining Phoenix is that the people I work with at AFM, which is mainly Jochen Richter and Nils Vasco, they all went to Raining Phoenix, and they are now running this perception label. So it's based. So only the name has changed, but the people I work with are basically the same. And since I felt very good handled, so to speak, at AFM with those guys. For me, also the offer was good, and so there was no need for me to go look for something else. So
Yeah.
I would. So we continue working like we did the past. Ever since the landing, and I also know the guys from the Dockyard times. Where they were selling the label. So I have a history with those people, and so it felt good and right to do it. So that's why I'm at Perception now.
Yeah. So you have a new single coming out. It might be out by the time I put this interview up, but you have another single coming out as well off the album. And, maybe talk about picking that specific track. I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's this track. It's taken from the Condition Red album, Walls of Fire. And it's a great song. It's also a great song on Condition Red. But since there's so many other really great and awesome songs on Condition Red. I mean, there's Titans, there's Ironbound, there's Paradise, there's Mindfeeder, blah, 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 and so on. Protector, all that. And so Walls of Fire always was a little bit in the shade of those monsters, so to speak,
Yeah.
And now that it's been taken off the shade from all those iconic Condition Red songs, it started to have its own life, let me put it like this, and I always loved this song, and but now that it's out of the Condition Red context, it's even better for me, and I think it's a very strong song. It has it's a really powerful song. Actually, we're already thinking of putting it into our live set, because it also would be great to perform this one live. Yeah, so that's why we picked Walls of Fire as the second single.
And that's Pete Silic talking about the singles from the album, talking about Perception, the new record label, and just again, really great job at picking the songs for this record and the production and everything on it. Now, here's what I will say. The Interlude EP was a big thing for me. So for those of you that need a little bit of a history lesson, that EP had, I believe, 5 studio tracks. It had 4 original songs and an amazing cover of Desert Plains by Judas Priest, which is probably my favorite cover of that song that anybody's done. And then you had some live tracks from the band, playing live. That EP came out right after Unification did, and before Dark Assault. When I heard the songs in that EP, Touching a Rainbow, Hatchet of War, Stone Cold, all those tracks on that Contortions of Time, all those tracks I thought were absolutely phenomenal. They really, and even today for me, they still hold up. Now, there is one of those tracks he did not, aside from the cover, there was one of those studio tracks he did not put on this upcoming Reforged album. That would be the song Hatchet of War, which is actually one of my favorite Iron Savior songs. However, Pete had his reasoning for not putting it on there. This is from the interview we just did where he talks about that. Check it out. But you did leave off Hatchet of War. That's the only complaint that I can give you.
Yeah, no, Hatchet of War. When I listened back to the song after so many years, and I keep listening to it, it just didn't touch me anymore. I thought, no, this song is just not cool enough to be re-recorded.
Yeah.
It can stay. I don't want to erase it, but putting work into it and trying to make this, because the song itself is just not good. I have to admit. I think the lyrics are ridiculous, and there is no way to fix the lyrics, and I cannot change the lyrics, And also the the drum arrangement, and so there was a lot of work to be done to this song to make it good, and I didn't feel like doing it. So I said, this is one song that I will not re-record, and the world will have to live with it. This song is, but it's still there, and you can still listen it to an interlude, but I didn't see, it wasn't qualified for re-recording.
So that's Pete Seelig talking about why Hatchet of War was not included on it. Now, there are a lot of you that like that song. I like that song a lot, but if you listen to that interview clip, he basically, his heart wasn't into really re-recording it. When he was listening to it, couldn't think of a way to really kind of bring that song out again. And so in that sense, I'm glad he didn't re-record it, because it probably would not have turned out well, especially if you're just really not feeling that song at the time. But the other tracks that he did, Stone Cold, Touching a Rainbow, Contortions of Time, I love those versions of those tracks, and I actually like them better than the original versions of them, both from a production standpoint. And another thing we pointed out in the interview, Pete's vocals are a lot better than they were back in those days. So he sings a little bit better. Some of the vocal harmonies were brought out more, especially the song Stone Cold. So I think they improved quite a bit. And the other interesting part of this album is listening to him sing a song like Break It Up, which was originally sung by Kai Hansen. That was on the actual first self-titled album. It's a lot like when he sang the song Watcher in the Sky, which was a song that appeared both on an Iron Savior and a Gamma Ray album. And again, Kai was singing that song originally. So hearing Pete do some of these songs that were done by that other singers, had been singing on these other albums, hearing that is kind of interesting, to hear his rendition and his version of the song. So overall, going to be honest, as always, as far as re-recordings go, I think this is one of the few times where there are drastic improvements on a lot of these songs compared to the originals. I just like the way that they're recorded. There's definitely some minor differences in how they sound. The approach is a little bit different for a lot of them. Anything that was off of the Dark Assault album saw drastic improvement. And overall, again, 10 out of 10 for these guys. Because re-recorded stuff is not easy. People might think, oh, you play those songs all the time, but re-recording them and adding new life to tracks, especially ones that really needed that to happen, like stuff like off of Dark Assault, for example, it's not an easy thing to do. And then you always have to deal with people that are mad that, oh, I like the original better. But in this case, I would say with a lot of these songs, I like the new versions better. There are obviously stuff from the first couple albums. I like the originals better, but again, the other versions are very, very good as well. And some of the revisions, which are very minor, you have better vocal harmonies. Maybe you hear something in the song you didn't hear before that was always there or wasn't as prominent. I think that is what's cool about these reforged albums. So that's pretty much where I stand on it. Now, I will say this for the review. I mentioned Hatchet of War. I'll leave this as my last statement here. It would be very, very cool to hear that maybe in the future, if Pete decides to record it as like a bonus track on like a future Iron Savior album, maybe the one that comes out next year or so. But that's a pipe dream for me. It may happen, it may not, but it has to happen for the right reason. I think that he'd have to really want to do it, because then it'll sound good. With that said, there was one interesting thing he talked about in this interview. I'm going to highlight this really quick. I asked about the next Iron Savior album, and I want you to hear what he said in that interview. Check out this clip. Have you started writing for the next Iron Savior album? You got a new label?
Yeah, of
everything
course.
going on.
I have I have a couple of songs already put together, but I was halted with this, of course, with the Reforged production, and right now I'm working on a different project because after Reforged, so it all leads to the big climax in 2026, where the new studio album is supposed to come out. So before that, we will put this Reforged album out in August. Then maybe also late this year or early 2026, we come out with a huge cover album. So it's going to be. Many fans have been asking me, why don't you do a cover album? You have so many covers and so many cover songs, and you really like to do a cover version album of whatever. And so right here I am doing it because the label also asked me for it, and it's gonna be. It's not metal songs that I do. I focused on doing it the crazy way, picking pop songs and mostly from the 80s because I'm 60 years old. So those are the songs that pop up, immediately. And so, so right now I'm working on, we have Journey, Separate Ways, we have Maniac, we have Relax, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, we have, what else? Yeah, Suburbia, Pet Shop Boys, everything there, it's going to be a jukebox of the 80s performed by Iron Savior. And I have to admit, I started working on this project with some doubts if it's going to be cool, and I have to say I love it.
I'll tell you what,
love it.
It's
so great. It feels so great. And for me, especially, it's such a great opportunity to let out this, the pop soul I always have, but I'm a metal guy, but of course, there's a pop vibe also in me that now I can let go and put it in those songs. They are in Savior 100%, but you're gonna listen to it, and let's talk. I think we're gonna talk about this in half a year or so.
Yeah. Well, I was a kid in the 80s. I grew up with all that stuff. I'll tell you what. For those that haven't heard it, my favorite pop cover that you've ever done was the Bryan Adams cover, the Run to You song. It was a Japanese bonus track, I'd like to say.
Yeah, I love that too.
That is probably because you've always done interesting. I've always brought this up. You've always done interesting covers, and they weren't necessarily heavy metal. You did Sweet Dreams. Remember that song? That's on the last Reforged album, and you've just always done some interesting. It hasn't always been heavy metal. It's always been an interesting song that you wouldn't expect. Like I would have never expected you do a cover of a song by Seal, for example, but somehow you made it work. And, you listen to that and I'm like, man, I don't know what it is. It's hard to explain unless people listen to it. But I'll tell you what, the Bryan Adams cover is awesome. I really hope you put that on that record or re-recorded or put a version of that, because that's probably it's a song Run to You for those that haven't heard it. But if you have the Killer Be Killed album, the Japanese version, that cover is probably my favorite one you've ever done.
Yeah, it's actually it's a good idea. I think I would put it on the album. Do some, bring it on the I think it's a good idea. I can do that.
And I grew up in the 80s, so I'm gonna be 50 years old in 2.5 years. And the thing is that when I was a kid, these songs were all songs you heard on the radio. And so when I hear people do covers of them, which doesn't happen often, but you hear it, like you're talking about, like the song Maniac or Separate Ways by Journey. I grew up with that stuff. That was stuff I listened to as a kid on the radio. So I'm interested. That's interesting. I'm really that actually intrigues me. And for whatever reason, if I were to take a compilation of all the cover tracks you've done, usually mostly, you had the Nazareth cover, I think, in the first album, but mostly it's either been 80s pop songs or Priest. Maybe, you had the Crocus song.
Yeah, there's Crocus and Nazareth.
Yeah,
so that's not Priest.
Yeah, but you've always done,
right.
But you had, you did a pretty good cover. Your cover of Desert Plains for me is probably, like I said, my favorite version of that song. I still, even when that EP comes up, if I bring that up, I actually go and listen to that. that track. And I think you did Delivering the Goods on the single once as well. But that Desert Plains track just I think that song just fit your voice, so, but I'm looking forward to the covers thing. That's really cool to hear, actually.
Yeah,
And
I
very
think you'll love
intriguing.
it. I'm quite sure you'll love it.
Yeah, definitely. You got to keep us posted on that one as well. So, but yeah, I'm really, really excited to see some of these songs on this last album see the light of day as well. But I'm looking forward to that covers thing. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? He has a few songs written, but he's looking to do a covers record. And I think that that's going to be interesting because the songs here he is going to pick, most of them will not be heavy metal songs. The one thing about Iron Savior, they've always done interesting covers, which weren't always covers of heavy metal bands. Yeah, you have the Crocus cover. They did some Judas Priest covers. But doing like a Bryan Adams song, for example, and making a heavy metal version of it is cool. So it'll be interesting if he, when he does an album like that, what it sounds like, because I think they are one of the few bands out there that actually make those songs sound good as heavy metal covers. So, as heavy metal songs. With that said, great record. I'll put a pre-order link in the show notes for you to pre-order the upcoming Iron Savior album. And I'm really looking forward to getting my physical copies, especially the copy in vinyl, which is going to be that really cool, like deep blue color. So that's where I'm at. 10 out of 10. I think a lot of these songs found a lot of new life. And I'm really excited for this thing to come out in the future of what Pete does with Iron Savior down the road here. Let me end it off. I'm going to end off the show going to talk about a single from one of the most criminally underrated bands to ever come out of Europe. That is the band Rage. Now, Rage has been going at this for over 40 years. I don't know how many albums he got, but it's got to be in the mid-20s. I didn't really count. But if there's ever been a band that you look at and respect for their longevity and their consistency, Rage is it. For those of you that have watched the program as a podcast, you know that I've had P.B. Wagner from Rage on this show not long ago, maybe a couple years, 3 years ago. You also know that he has come on my radio show, if you follow the radio show, quite a bit. And this is a band I ended up getting into many, many years ago. I'll tell you the funny story about Rage is that I heard of the band back in the late 90s, heard nothing by them, and looked everywhere for their albums. I had to import pretty much everything. This would have been 97 or 98. And the people that had their records, they didn't have very many copies of them. They were like out of print, like nobody could get them. So I took this chance and bought like 7 or 8 CDs. I'm thinking, wow, I hope I really like this band. And thank God I did. The album that was out at the time was an album called 13. So everything 13 and everything all the way back I found. Noise had actually reissued a lot of the albums too. But you couldn't really, they were hard to get, but I eventually ended up getting them all at once. I had like a stack of like 10 albums. And I ended up finding a reissue of the band Avenger, which was, I think, the first, that was the band before Rage. So I ended up getting those 2 records as well. It was a reissue. And I've loved this band ever since. They're just the epitome of consistency. One of the things Rage has also done a very, very good job of too is when they've integrated their music with classical music. Now, for those of you that may know, obviously this is something Metallica did in the late 90s, but Rage was doing this back in the early 90s. I mean, I don't think Metallica copied off of them, but Rage was doing a phenomenal job at this, and 13 was actually the first real album where they wrote an album that had a lot of these kinds of sounds in it. Classical music, classical instruments, things like that. So they have a new album called Freedom. And lo and behold, I listened to it. Just as good and catchy as anything they've ever done. So I will link that in the show notes. But to be perfectly honest, Peavy is one of the coolest dudes I've ever spoken to. Here's a guy that, Rage is not some huge band like, I don't know, they never got as big as Halloween. They're not like a Metallica. They're probably mid-level, mid-market maybe. But man, Peavy is still going at it after 40 years. And when you talk to him, the guy feels ageless. Like the guy's just going to go on forever. But I love this band.